I'm gonna light my candle. One moment. Hi, I've lit my candle now. Things are good, and yeah, so. Hi, my name is Jamie. I live in Saudi Arabia, and I have a makeup collection that just keeps getting larger. But today, bless you, chair. Kitties. So today I kind of want to do something different actually, and I've been kind of thinking about doing this for a while, not known exactly how to do it. Shut up. Anyway, so if you're interested, I'm gonna today talk about Saudi Arabia. I'm gonna do a get ready with me. I'm drinking some tea with some aloe juice in it for my gut health. And I've got some things that I want to kind of film later, so I'm gonna kind of go hard today a bit. And I just kind of want to put some makeup on my face, and I'll talk to you about Saudi Arabia, and I'll talk to you about what I think. There are some kind of subjects that I am going to not touch on with a 10-foot pole. There are some things that if I act a little cagey about describing, it's just because I have to kind of respect the conventions of this country. And, you know, this is the country in which I am gainfully employed. And ultimately, I'm very grateful to be here. So bear that in mind. I know that Saudi Arabia is kind of a mysterious country to a lot of people, and the Middle East in general is kind of a mysterious zone that maybe depending on from where you're watching, you're not sure about. And I'm here to maybe dispel, like, not rumors. Maybe I can shed some light, maybe give you a perspective from where I live and what I've seen so far. If that interests you, please feel free to stick around. I'm gonna just put some makeup on my face, and yeah, we'll get started. I'm not gonna talk about the makeup, however, I will talk about it in the description. So yeah, I've written some notes, and yeah, I'll just kind of be going along. Hopefully this won't take too long. So the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was founded and united under King Abdulaziz, the first king of Saudi Arabia, in 1932, meaning that this country in and of itself is less than 100 years old. It is 90 years old. So to keep that in perspective, my grandmother is 96. My hometown university, I think, was founded in 1901. So this is a very young country. And I think that this kind of plays into kind of some of, I don't know, this kind of plays into certain things. Like, there's certain factors. So imagine the United States at a time when it was 90 years old. How would you imagine that would be? Not even like, would you want to live there? How would you imagine that to be? So that's kind of something you should always bear in mind. However, the conventions and customs of this culture have existed for, you know, many hundreds, if not thousands of years. So the country was united under King Abdulaziz, and he conquered and united this peninsula by and large by military conquest and by pushing out the Ottomans, and also ultimately by marrying the daughters of tribal leaders. So that's something that I don't think a lot of people understand or recognize about Saudi Arabia, is that it is still by and large a tribal society. So for instance, there's one particular last name that is very prevalent in the region that has probably 8 million tribe members. Another one is maybe like 3 million members or something like that. So there are some kind of ancient or more ancient cultural things that an outsider or a Westerner wouldn't necessarily be aware of. So it's a little bit not as homogenous as you would think. The kingdom is an absolute monarchy, which means that the king is the law. All areas of government are in fact ruled by the royal family. So Saudi Arabia joined the UN in 1945, roughly coinciding with the discovery of oil within the region. I know that Kuwait, I didn't exactly look up when they discovered oil in Saudi Arabia, but I know that our neighboring country, Kuwait, found oil in 1936, and I'm not going to get into this because I really don't care. There has been a lot of American influence in Saudi Arabia due to the discovery of oil and the establishment of Aramco, Arab American company. Is that right? Tell me if I'm right. I'll be stoked if I'm right. So another thing to kind of keep in mind, if you didn't already know, that prior to the discovery of oil in the region, Saudi Arabia was a very, very poor country. So their primary, I want to say that their primary source of like income for the whole country's economy was from pilgrimage and from the exportation of dates. Like dates. Dates are good, everyone likes dates, but yeah, so that was their primary revenue for their country. And so the discovery of oil kind of brings with it the foundation of our relationship, and when I say our, I mean American. That's not necessarily the case for everybody. By the way, I'm gonna go in with a Surge palette. The discovery of oil, like I kind of mentioned, is largely the foundation of our relationship with Saudi Arabia. So in exchange for a fair supply of oil at a reasonable cost, we provide military protection to Saudi Arabia within the region. They also, I don't know, if I'm not mistaken, they also provide us with quite a bit of surveillance for the region. So historically, Saudi Arabia is one of the United States' closest allies in the Middle East. Let's talk about kind of where this is going. I know that based on where I'm from Idaho, guys. And I understand and recognize that there are a lot of prejudices and biases about the Arab world coming from Americans. So is like one of the main misconceptions that I would like to dispel is that Saudi Arabia and even like the Gulf region is considered a third world country. And I think that when we think of a third world country as Americans, we're kind of programmed and conditioned to believe that a third world country is like a, country with no running water, that has problems with disease and sanitation and has low economic growth, which is not the case in Saudi Arabia. So the exact definition of a third world country is kind of antiquated at this point and largely refers to a country that did not side with NATO in the 1950s during the Cold War. So that's it. And again, there's somebody out there that can explain this a lot better. That's kind of where our prejudices sort of begin, I suppose. And Saudi Arabia is considered a developing country and has what we would call a less mature, less sophisticated economy. And I would agree to that, as in Riyadh is definitely now becoming the economic center of the Middle East. It didn't always used to be that way, but previous to that, it was definitely Dubai. But now things are kind of shifting in that direction, but it isn't homogenous throughout the country. Granted, I haven't been to a lot of regions in Saudi Arabia myself. I've been only to like the three major cities, I suppose, and I'm sure this is arguable. I've been to Jeddah and Dammam, and a little bit here and there in between. Our American exposure in general to the Middle East comes largely from a very militarized news media perspective, and it kind of like I understand how we are sort of programmed and led to believe a certain way, and it's hard, especially to a common American person, it's hard to kind of distinguish the differences between Arab countries and kind of who is doing what, where, and who are they. A lot of the news media coverage is obviously very violent. It's obviously, again, highly like coming from a military perspective, and we had been in Afghanistan, for instance, for 20 something years. And it was always kind of a nebulous thing. I remember growing up, and I'm 31 years old. like I couldn't quite distinguish between myself, like news coverage of Afghanistan and news coverage of Iraq, and like what are these places. Like Saudi Arabia tends to get grouped into kind of these like frightening or unfamiliar or scary neighboring countries that are, again, sort of the countries that we're exposed to through news media. And it's just like every other country that you may visit. There are safer parts of the country than others, but in general, this is a very, very, very safe country. Very, very safe. And there has like been more exposure to the outside world than I think that maybe you may be aware of. So for example, in 2015, King Abdullah promoted an initiative to get a lot of people educated outside of the kingdom. And he created the King Abdullah Scholarship Program and gave Saudis an opportunity to study abroad. So many people speak English here, either due directly to that scholarship program or due to the after effects of that scholarship program. And the after effects of that scholarship program still can definitely be felt. In a 2014 article, it says that 20% of Saudis had obtained a bachelor's degree outside of the country due to this program. So that kind of leaves off like my official research. I'll maybe provide some links if you're interested. So what am I doing here? To be fair, I ask myself this all the time. So I had a lot of Saudi friends, actually, from around the time of, I want to say 2016 onwards. So just past the King Abdullah Scholarship Program, and I kind of had a different impression of Saudi Arabia than a lot of people may have, and I have kind of a different background. So like I mentioned, I am from Idaho and I grew up in a very rural, small town. Yeah, I just didn't have much exposure to anything in the outside world. And like I mentioned, you know, I had kind of a similar, I had kind of a similar exposure to the Arab world as well as everyone else. So, you know, I didn't know better than anybody else growing up at all. And I also, side note, I grew up training horses. That is all I ever wanted to do. That's what I wanted to do when I grew up. I wanted to train horses. I don't know about any of you, but that's what I wanted to do. By the way, I'm going into the Surge palette, and then also I'm thinking about using this palette from Terra Moons as well. So I'm kind of just planning and mapping and strategizing what I want to do here. So my goal in life, more or less, was that just I wanted to train horses. That's what I did. My family had horses growing up. That's what I wanted to do. And I attempted to start training professionally, and I worked out of a stable and was an assistant dressage instructor at a stable for a couple of years after I graduated from college. And, you know, that was great and everything. But for me, obviously that wasn't the best that wasn't the best way to make money. Let's be serious. Unless you are born into a very wealthy family that can really support that dream, that is a dream for sure. And, you know, after a couple of years of working really hard, I just hadn't really gotten anywhere, and I was still really struggling financially all the time. And like training horses and being in the horse industry is very seasonal in the Pacific Northwest. I wouldn't think that anybody could argue with me there. And I was just tired of it. I'd worked really hard and I'd accomplished a couple of good goals that was, you know, something to be proud of, but I just didn't see myself really pushing past that. I was investing everything I ever made money-wise back into my horses, and in order to probably compete at the level that I really wanted to compete at, I was going to have to try to get my hands on a $60,000 horse and also wait for like a long time, because that horse was going to be young and there was no way for me to do that. I was going to have to wait for that horse to grow up, and it was going to take a long time. So, you know, I was 20, man, how old was I? I was 25 or something at the time. And it just, you know, it just kind of dawned on me that I had really given up a lot of experiences I had just like not experienced a lot based on my passion for horses. And I had other things that I wanted to do. Like I had always wanted to travel. And my actual like bachelor's degree is in art history. So I do like what I studied. It's not that I don't, it's just that, like, what do you do with that other than teach? And so, you know, here we are, I'm a teacher now. But I did enjoy what I studied. I did, like, you know, think that what I studied was important, because it does give me kind of the desire to search for context and to kind of understand what motivates people and what like motivates societies and kind of what cultural movements come out of that. I do believe that what I studied was important, not to everyone, but to me. And I just wasn't gonna have the opportunity to like either use any of that knowledge or like see it, you know, see it develop into anything, or like be a part of anything that was important. So what I ended up doing is I retired and sold my older horse. I ended up selling my younger horse, finally. And I decided that I was gonna move to Egypt. So I not only, like, that was a short version as well. So I also had to go ahead and get like some sort of teaching credential, and, you know, to be honest, like what I have is, or what I obtained at the time was a bit laughable. Teaching English is a foreign language credential, I guess. They're very easy to get, by the way. And since I had a bachelor's degree, and my bachelor's degree, you could kind of interpret it in a few different ways, I suppose. Like you could interpret it. I am doing a green look. See, I'm being very patriotic right now. Since you could kind of interpret that as more of a like potential for teaching or even a history type of degree, it worked. I obtained that teaching credential, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna go to Egypt. And I mean, in the middle of there was of course men. But men. Is this my thing? If you know, you know, you know. So along the way, I happened to meet a lot of people from the Middle East, and as a gentle segue, I found myself very compatible. Gentle segue. More compatible than some. I have and have had an aptitude for kind of understanding, or, you know, not being necessarily affronted by certain realities that, you know, are a little bit difficult for common American people to understand. I'm not saying it's right, I'm saying it just is, you know? So there are a lot of things like that where in the Middle East, it's not that it's right, it just is. You know, and who am I to kind of argue these things? Who am I to take away, you know, hundreds of years of convention from you? My ultimate goal was to, you know, make money. Make money, travel, see things, do things, meet people, just kind of open myself up more to a life that I hadn't had previously, because I'd been so invested in my horses. And I will always love horses, and I will always try to have horses, but I had been up until then living my whole life for horses, and it just hadn't quite turned out how I had hoped. So, you know, for better, for worse, good or bad, like, I worked really hard, but it just hadn't, you know, it just hadn't gone the way I'd hoped that it would go. And in fairness, it doesn't go that way for a lot of people. And it doesn't go that way for a lot of people for a long time. Like I said, I will always love horses and I'll always want to have horses, but I don't think that a lot of the things that I'd hoped for are in the cards for me in that regard. So, you know, it was kind of better just to accept that and try to make money and live the most out of a life that I wanted to have. In the middle of that, I was dating, and I was dating people from Saudi Arabia. And that's not conventional, by the way. So yeah, I should say as well, yeah, like that kind of attitude is not necessarily well understood or well accepted from where I come from. We'll put it that way. So yeah, I don't know. I wanted also, in moving to Egypt, I wanted to see if I could live in the Middle East on its terms as well, because there is a considerable safety net in, you know, dating somebody or like having I shouldn't say dating. There's a considerable safety net in having relationships with people that are not your culture when they're in your country, not theirs. So I wanted to see, if I could live in an Islamic Muslim country, rather, on its terms, not mine, and if I would survive. Not literally, I mean, like, would I run away screaming? So the thing about the Middle East in general, and again, this is a huge generalization, not everyone's experience is going to be the same as mine. I'm referring largely to like teaching in the Middle East. And granted, my experience is not everyone's experience. Just keep that in mind. But I'm just kind of making generalizations. So teaching in the Middle East is fairly lucrative in terms of like teacher salary. So that is generally what appeals people to the region, and that's, you know, it was kind of one and the same for me. I also kind of had wondered if in general I could get into the Middle East and also get some more footing on my horse career, because there is a lot of interest in riding in the Middle East, and that is true. And there is a pretty substantial need for female trainers, which I'll explain in a moment. I'll go over that. So this was the plan. I didn't really know when or if I would ever be able to return to training full time, but I sort of figured like if there was a way to do it, I was gonna probably have to find it not in the United States. So keep that in mind. And again, kind of in a way, teaching is teaching. I have taught in the US, I have taught riding lessons in the US, so do I know how to structure a lesson? Sure. Do I know how to make myself understood with fairly abstract ideas? Sure. I would imagine that's true. So off I went to Egypt, and Egypt is not a necessarily more lucrative place to teach. It was kind of my first stop in order to gain experience and, like I said, kind of acclimate myself to an unfamiliar culture and an unfamiliar environment. And I'd gone to Egypt for a vacation first to see what was. And I'm not joking, when I landed for the first time in Egypt, And I had traveled, I'd been to Europe before. But when I landed in Egypt and I set foot on the ground and I walked outside and that heat hit me for the first time, I felt like I was on a different planet. Like, I wasn't even the same. And I just felt like I had landed on the moon a little bit. Like, it is so different. It is so different than what we know in the US, and especially again where I come from, a very rural, small town. It is so different from what we day-to-day experience and how things are. And you have to kind of let a lot of your logic just go in these situations and just kind of see things for what they are, not for how they should be to you, because they're never going to be that way. So with that in mind, I had a great first year teaching. I had a good time in Egypt. And there were reasons I didn't stay. One of those being is that I was not working legally, which is a whole other questionnaire. I had no intention of not working legally, but you know, that's a whole other thing. And also not uncommon. It's getting less common now, but not then. And mind you, this was 5 years ago almost. Yeah, I left the United States in, God, what year is that? 2018, fall 2018. To be fair too, when I left the US, like, I was ready. I was ready to go. It was scary, I was afraid, but I was ready to go. Politically, economically, everything was just pointing me to get gone, you know? And that was something different that I had experienced in Egypt as well, is that like I had a respectable job in Egypt. I was a more respected member of society than I was in my own country, because in my own country, all I could do was be a barista, you know? All I could do was work in a restaurant. And that was, you know, kind of the extent of what was possible for me. And at least with this, I could go into the workforce and be somebody. Which, yeah, like, I am always gonna be grateful to Egypt in really helping me gain my independence as a person, so, yeah. Thanks. And also, I love you, Egypt. Bye-bye. So yeah, like, I had a great first year teaching, and I kind of assumed that the only way to go was up as well. So there were reasons that I left, and it had like nothing to do with like a lack of love for Egypt, but I did want more stability. I also wanted a greater salary, and my goal always was to teach in the Gulf, because the Gulf is where the money is, you know? The Gulf is where the money is, the Gulf is where the horses are, the Gulf is the thing, you know? That's where everybody is vying to go. And I was kind of shooting for either Kuwait or Saudi Arabia, and specifically Riyadh, because again, that's kind of where the money was. That's kind of where society was. That was where I was most culturally interested and drawn to. And yeah, so I interviewed for both Kuwait and Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and I ended up choosing Saudi Arabia. I got an offer from both places. I got here, and it was a lot of anticipation. I had really, like I said, assumed that there was just nowhere to go but up. That's all I have to say. Oh man, oh dude, was I not correct. So, I'll put it this way. There's nothing like bureaucratically wrong with Saudi Arabia, in my opinion. My complaints have always had to do specifically with my individual job. And if my job was different, I probably would have had a different experience overall, but I didn't, so I haven't. When I woke up in Riyadh the first day and looked out the window, I was like, oh, this is a mistake. Egypt was kind of my test year, and then I got home and I sold everything. I don't have a car, and I sold that, I think I sold that before I moved to Egypt, I don't remember. But like, I sold all my house furniture, like everything. So I don't have like anything in the US to my name to this day. So there's that, which factors, you know, like I truly don't know what I'm gonna do if I ever have to go back home. I don't have a single clue. I don't have a plan. But I woke up in Riyadh and I was just like, oh no. Riyadh is so much different than what I expected. First of all, it's flat, which sounds dumb, but even Cairo is not flat. Even Cairo has like distinguishing features about it. Like you can kind of tell what district you're in. It's a huge city. That's the other thing too, is that Cairo has approximately like 35 million people in it properly. And I was kind of like, yep, Cairo's a big ass city. Cairo's kind of a lot for me sometimes, and it is. I love it, but man, there are a lot of people all the time. It is noisy all the time in Cairo. I'm not even joking. So yeah, like I was kind of thinking to myself, like, yeah, it'll be nice to get to Riyadh where there's like 7 or 8 million people. That'll be fine. And Riyadh's flat, and there's nothing that distinguishes one part of town from the other. You just have to learn it, which is kind of disheartening in a way to me. And then as well, where I lived was way on the east side, as far away from civilization as I could get. Like hospitals, a grocery store. Where my school put us was in the middle of nowhere. And it was all new housing developments, and it was in the middle of nowhere. It was so bad. And the housing itself was terrible. I mean, like, unbelievable. And again, I tried to tell everybody, I was like, you guys, you don't understand. I lived in Cairo. Cairo is not easy, guys. Like, Cairo's not a bad, you know, it's not necessarily like, you know, the easiest place to navigate or to, you know, get your sea legs on if you've never lived out of the country. Like, Cairo's tough. And this was an exercise of pure will, honestly. Like, my first year was an exercise of just me being stubborn and not being a quitter. So yeah, it was hard. It was not what I had thought it was gonna be. I had envisioned Riyadh as being like, you know, more just more sophisticated, more advanced, and there was so much like process and bureaucracy to get into the country that I was like, oh, it's automatic. Like, of course it's gonna be better. Of course I'm gonna have a better time here. No. Not true necessarily, no. Like I said, where I had come from, I didn't have a work permit or a work visa, so I was working in the country illegally, and of course, like here, I have that, of course I do, but my housing was so subpar to even what I had had in Egypt that it was crazy. And again, like, I'm not fussy. Well, I am, but like, I have I guess, rational expectations, I suppose. And yeah, all my expectations were totally foiled, like immediately. And then my Saudi friends, you know, they can't, it's partially that like they're men, so it's a little bit unconventional for them to, you know, be helping a foreign woman out with their families. It wouldn't exactly look right for them, and you know, like I just want them to have a good life and be happy, you know. And I'm sure they want the same for me, but like, yeah, they can't be necessarily like advocating on my behalf. I assumed like, yeah, I'm gonna have more support, I'm gonna have more resources, I'm gonna have more people to help me acclimate. Because again, I assumed that I was walking into kind of a different situation with my employer than what it actually had turned out to be. So my first 3 months were so hard. Like, it was in Cairo, it was a blast. It was easy. I mean, it wasn't easy, but it was just a different life. It was just a different thing than living here. And I still even like can't wrap my head around that. It still has never really turned out to be what I expected or wanted. So in a way, in a sense. And yeah, so then I guess that's kind of how I ended up here in a nutshell. So I guess the next thing to discuss is kind of what people think when I say that I live here. So, or like what kind of questions people have. And maybe that has answered some of your questions as to what I'm doing here. I'm a teacher. I right now teach ESL. Let's not talk about my job. Like I touched on earlier, it is really safe to live here overall. Like there are some things that I'm not necessarily going to get into, just because it's fairly nuanced, and it's just not today. Not today, not the right time. And I'm sure people are just curious about this culture and these people. So, as you may know, Saudi Arabia is, their state religion is Islam, and they are the stewards of the Kaaba, meaning that like the big religious site that is important for all Muslims around the world, they are in charge of it. So, like I mentioned, that means that there are a lot of people that come here for pilgrimages, etc. I'll be right back. I guess one of the most common questions I face or discuss with people is, am I Muslim? The answer is no. I don't have any intention of becoming Muslim. I won't for the foreseeable future, as far as I know. And how does that dynamic kind of play out in the Middle East? I won't say that it's altogether like comfortable all of the time, and I'm not just speaking about Saudi Arabia, I'm speaking about Egypt as well. But kind of coming from where I come from and seeing what I've seen in terms of like, you know, racism, etc., the Muslim ban, I don't want to contribute to that society, you know? Like, I want to contribute to a society where we can coexist peacefully next to each other and not have a problem with it. So I do believe that we can all live together happily and prosperously. One of the big things in Islam is just mind your business. Mind your business. Generally speaking, there are some conflicting, I guess, things that I can't really like not get into, but just like I don't know exactly what the verbiage is about what to call that. But there is a big part of Islam that says just be nice and mind your business. Don't be dumb to people just because. So again, that is a society and a culture and an economy that I would prefer to participate in versus a culture or economy that institutes a Muslim ban and calls it as such. That's just me. I mean, that has been rectified for sure. I guess, hasn't it? I don't know. That has been rectified evidently, but you know, I just don't see the US kind of addressing these prejudices anytime soon. What? I'm not saying that it's all love and roses and hearts, but in terms of like the way a culture is developing, the direction a culture is developing, I tend to side more with Saudi Arabia than I do with my own culture, in a way. Again, I think like by and large, the negatives that I have in my brain come or are derived more from my job. Generally speaking, Saudis are really generous people. Very polite. There are a lot of like polite conventions that you have to follow in Saudi Arabia. And for instance, like there's a lot about honoring your guests and making your guests feel comfortable. And again, like I said, a lot of Islam is, or not a lot of Islam, but one crucial piece of Islam is to just mind your business and be good. Mind your business, be nice to people. About Riyadh. Riyadh has about 8 million people in it, like I mentioned. It is an ever expanding city. It is, like I said, kind of becoming the economic culture or the economic center of the Middle East. Slowly but surely. And Saudi Arabia is opening up gradually in the sense that from 2019 to now, for example, you can get a tourist visa on arrival as well. This was a country that was not previously open to tourism at all. Zero. Previous to, I believe, 2018, I want to say? I don't remember. I was here when this happened. I will say I came in 2019 and a lot of things shifted that year. Obviously, like COVID kind of derailed some things, and I will also say very openly and very honestly that Saudi Arabia handled the epidemic magnificently as a government. I did not see the level of panic or shortage or problems or death here than I don't know. I spent the entire epidemic here, and I was arguably, well, I did get COVID here, I was arguably much safer in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh, than I would have been in my hometown, in my country, in my state. So yeah, there are some things that I am grateful about. I'm pretty over it, like just in terms of my day-to-day life and my job, but again, like a lot of that doesn't have anything to do with the policies of the country necessarily. So like I said, this is a very young country. This is a very young, like, people as well. The median age of Saudi Arabia is 32 years old. So they young, and they're having lots of kids. So, you know, wow, this is interesting. So what is there to do? Well, I guess kind of what people are most interested in, or like what kind of, I don't know, scares people in a way. in terms of like customs in the Arab world and in Saudi Arabia is, what do people wear? Which, yes, does factor here, but it is becoming more and more trivial. I'm not saying that it's the best. Oh, and I should back up. So the kind of standard like professional dress for men that are Saudi here is a thobe, which is like the white thing, and a shmag, which is the like red and white checkered thing that they wear on their head that's held in place by a gutra. And if I'm not saying these correctly, I'm sorry. Gutra, I'm not sure about. Shmag, I don't know, maybe. And that's just kind of their standard national dress. That's what you would wear if you're a man, if you're going to work, that's generally what you wear. That's not to say that like Saudi men don't wear street clothes depending on the situation, they do. But for like a business or a more formal occasion, even just like walking around, generally, you'll see a lot of people wearing thobe. Kind of the thing that people gravitate talking about most towards is what women wear. So abaya is just kind of a long garment now, essentially. It covers your arms and goes down more or less to your ankles or your feet. And it can be open, it can be closed, it can be whatever color now. So there are still people that are fairly religious and fairly conservative. And what you'll see them do is, especially women, they will wear the abaya that is black, typically. Again, these are more conservative people. This isn't me, and this isn't everyone. But they'll wear a black abaya, and it'll be closed, so you can't see anything. And then most women, not all women, but most women at this point will wear hijab. So hijab is the head covering. So it only covers the head and the neck, typically. So most women will wear an abaya and a hijab. So that is kind of standard. Then in some places or some people, it just depends, they will still wear the niqab. So the niqab is tied over the hijab, and it covers the rest of your forehead and your face so that your eyes are the only thing that are visible, and you can lift it up as you please. So not everyone, not everyone, not all the time, just depends on the situation. Some people, again, are still more conservative, and that's okay. They can live their life as they choose. You know, I'm not the one. For me, living in the Middle East in general, like granted I have my thoughts and opinions, but you know, especially with what women wear and what Muslim women wear, who am I to come into their country and tell them that what they're doing is wrong? You know, especially like these older women and the older generation, like who am I to say like, you know, you can take off your abaya, like you can take off your niqab now, you can take off your hijab now, and you will see Saudi women that don't wear hijab even, and you will see Saudi women that wear colored abayas, etc. Whereas before you never would. It was still fairly uncommon when I came in 2019 to see women wearing colored abaya. And in some businesses, I think they still have to wear a black abaya, and they may even have to wear niqab, I'm not quite sure. So yeah, things are different, things are slowly changing, but it's progress is being made. What do I do? So as a foreigner, I'm not required to wear an abaya. I, again, kind of have to respect the conventions of the country and dress more conservatively. But in most public spaces, I'm not required to wear anything particular. So Another note about public spaces is that famously Saudi Arabia had laws about gender segregation. So that means that like single males cannot sit in the same section as families or single females. And that changed immediately when I got here. If it wasn't already a thing, it was not a thing by the time I got here. And that practice or that decision now lies in the hands of whatever business establishment there is. So there are still places that allow for more conservative families to be that way, or conservative people to eat that way. Not everywhere. It's becoming less and less common for sure. So when I first got here, it was more frequent, but now that I've been here for a while, I have seen a sharp decline in business establishments that are segregated. Another big thing is that when I first got here, all businesses had to close during prayer, and there's prayer 5 times a day. So it gets a little complicated trying to figure out when in the hell you're supposed to go do something. So that now has changed and shifted to be under the discretion of, again, the business. So a business does not necessarily have to close during prayer time. It is up to their preference. I will say it's fairly common for most businesses to close at least at some point during the day for prayer, maybe if not once, a few times, I don't know. I work, so I don't know. It was so inconvenient when I first got here. Ugh, so dumb. I was so angry. And they don't do that in Egypt. That's not a thing in Egypt. It's possible, and you see people pray, but the business itself does not close. They may not attend you, but the business isn't closed. Except during Ramadan. Ramadan's a whole different thing. One thing that I would really like to see change at some point is there are no dressing. Like, that was something that was really weird when I got here, because there are no dressing rooms for clothing stores. It's not the case everywhere, but in most places, yeah, they don't have dressing rooms. Not a thing. You have to buy whatever you want to buy, and then if it doesn't fit, then you gotta bring it back, which is really annoying. One thing I will say about Riyadh and in general Saudi Arabia is that dang do you need a car here. It is so aggravating to not have a car. And that was a big shock to me coming here from Egypt, and kind of like living as an expat in Egypt, is that ain't no way you would get a car there. There's no sense in getting a car in Egypt. You're just begging to die, essentially. And also, like, it doesn't suit my purposes, you know? Like, I'm an expat. I'm not here to stay forever. I'm not here to, I don't know, like, our life as an expat is, you know, fairly subject to where the wind blows next, you know? So I'm not gonna buy a car. But in Riyadh, not only should you buy a car, it's just accepted. It's just standard. You need to for a lot of things, which is really aggravating to me. I can drive. Oh, that's another thing too. Women definitely drive here. That said, right now it's very difficult to get your license because they are at such a long wait time. So there's that. I have my license. We're all good. What does the future hold for me here? What does the future hold? I don't know. There are a lot of things that I appreciate about living here. And a lot of those things would not be available to me in my own country. Like healthcare. Granted, there have been some crappy things here and there, but that's the case with anywhere. There will come a point where they don't need my industry anymore, which is teaching English. There are a lot of people teach English, or a lot of people speak English, and that's great. I wouldn't say that Saudi Arabia is ready to pioneer its own English program necessarily, but you know, that's the goal. That's their right. They have every right to want to sustain their country themselves. I think like my industry and my days here in general are numbered. Mostly I think like my industry's days are numbered. It's not for certain, it's probably not anytime real soon, but you know, it's not as lucrative of a region as it used to be. The market is kind of closing around us, and it is expensive to live here, and it is becoming more and more expensive to live here. You know, inflation is everywhere. What are you gonna do? So this is the finished look for now. I'm gonna do a try on, so I needed something pretty vampy and pretty specific for my try on, so thus we look like this right now. Just ignore my whole lipstick situation. It ain't good. It's not ideal. Thanks for watching. Let me know if there's anything else that you'd want me to discuss. Let me know if you have any other questions. Within reason, I can answer them. Like I said, I kind of have to tread lightly and respect the conventions of the country in which I live, so just keep that in mind. And I hope I answered your questions a little bit and sated your curiosities a little bit and given you a little bit of insight on the Middle East. So let me know if you want to explore the topic a little bit more, and I will catch you later. Bye.